The oxygen thinned in the cramped cabin at 30,000 feet as 12-year-old Malik Washington clutched his chest. His father Darnell frantically searched their bags while confronting the flight attendant who admitted throwing away the suspicious container. Standing tall, voice quivering with controlled rage, Darnell uttered one sentence that silenced the entire aircraft: "My son could die because you decided his medication looked suspicious on a black child." Before we dive into this shocking story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button if you believe everyone deserves equal treatment regardless of skin color, and subscribe to stay updated on stories that expose injustice. Now, let's rewind 24 hours to see how this terrifying situation began. Malik, did you pack your backup inhaler? Aisha Washington called up the stairs of their suburban Chicago home. The morning sunlight streamed through large windows, illuminating framed medical degrees and family portraits adorning the walls. "Yes, Mom. It's in my backpack with the spacer," Malik replied, carefully zipping his science textbook into his carry-on. At 12 years old, Malik was already showing promise as a future scientist, with particular interest in respiratory medicine, perhaps influenced by his own severe asthma condition. Darnell Washington, dressed in a tailored navy suit, came downstairs carrying his presentation materials. As one of the country's leading neurosurgeons, he was heading to Boston to receive the prestigious Hoffman Award for his groundbreaking research on neural pathway restoration. The entire family was attending the ceremony: his wife Aisha, a formidable corporate attorney, their son Malik, and 8-year-old daughter Zara, who was currently twirling in her new dress. "Big day tomorrow," Darnell smiled, kissing Aisha on the cheek. "You ready for your husband to become famous?" Aisha laughed, straightening his tie. "More famous than you already are, Dr. Washington. I don't think your ego could handle it." Their playful banter masked the underlying tension that always accompanied their travels. Despite their impressive credentials, Darnell's position as chief of neurosurgery at Chicago Memorial and Aisha's partnership at Goldstein and Rivera Law. They knew their skin color meant additional scrutiny at every step of the journey. "Dad, I packed extra batteries for my nebulizer," Malik said, dragging his suitcase to the door. His asthma had been particularly troublesome lately, triggered by the changing seasons. The family had a well-established routine for managing his condition, including multiple backup plans for medications. Darnell nodded approvingly. "Good thinking, son. And you have the doctor's note for security?" In the front pocket, laminated, Malik replied with the practiced response of someone who had navigated medical needs while traveling his entire life. Aisha meticulously checked their documentation one final time: boarding passes, IDs, medical certificates, hotel confirmations. As a lawyer, she left nothing to chance, especially when traveling as a black family. She'd seen too many cases of discrimination to be anything but overprepared. "Zara, sweetie, time to go," she called to her daughter, who was now engrossed in a book about space exploration. The drive to O'Hare International Airport was filled with Zara's excited chatter about Boston and seeing the Atlantic Ocean for the first time. Malik was quieter, occasionally using his inhaler as the anticipation of travel triggered mild symptoms. "Remember what we talked about," Darnell said quietly to Malik as they pulled into the airport parking structure. "Keep your inhaler in your pocket where you can reach it easily, but try not to use it in front of others unless necessary." Malik nodded solemnly. They'd had this conversation before, the delicate balance between managing his medical condition and avoiding unwanted attention. At 12, he already understood the additional burden his black skin placed on ordinary activities, even ones as critical as taking medication. "It's not fair that I have to hide it," Malik said, his voice carrying a maturity beyond his years. Darnell sighed, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "No, it's not fair at all. But sometimes, staying safe means being strategic about how we present ourselves. It shouldn't be that way, but until the world changes, we have to be twice as careful," Malik finished his father's familiar phrase. The airport was bustling with summer travelers. The Washington family joined the security line, tickets and IDs ready. Despite their first-class status, they weren't offered the priority lane until Aisha specifically requested it, showing their boarding passes to an apologetic attendant. At the security checkpoint, Darnell and Aisha exchanged knowing glances as a TSA agent called them aside for random additional screening. The agent paid particular attention to Malik's medical bag, removing and examining each item while white families with similar equipment passed through with cursory checks. "Sir, what's the purpose of this device?" the agent questioned, holding up Malik's nebulizer. "It's a nebulizer for my son's asthma medication," Darnell explained calmly, despite having already provided the doctor's documentation. "He has severe asthma and sometimes needs breathing treatments." The agent examined the machine suspiciously before finally allowing them through, but not before swabbing Malik's hands for explosive residue. "Did you notice the Thompson family?" Aisha whispered to Darnell, nodding toward a white family with a child carrying similar medical equipment who had passed through without question. "Their son has the exact same model nebulizer." Darnell squeezed her hand. "I noticed. But today is about celebration, not confrontation. Let's focus on getting to Boston and that award ceremony." As they approached their gate, the boarding process had begun. The gate agent smiled warmly when checking their boarding passes, but her expression faltered slightly upon seeing them, a micro-expression of surprise that they'd mastered recognizing over years of similar encounters. "First-class boarding is now open," announced the gate agent, as the Washington family gathered their belongings. Little did they know that crossing the jet bridge would lead to a confrontation that would change their lives and spark a national conversation about race, medicine, and the skies that supposedly belong to everyone. "Welcome aboard," a flight attendant greeted passengers at the aircraft door, her smile dimming noticeably when the Washington family approached. Heather Davis, as her name tag identified her, was a blonde woman in her mid-40s with a rigid posture and meticulously applied makeup. "You're in first class?" Heather questioned, her tone suggesting disbelief despite the boarding passes clearly visible in Darnell's hand. "Yes, seats 2A through 2D, Darnell replied evenly, maintaining the pleasant but firm demeanor he'd perfected through countless similar interactions. Heather examined their boarding passes with unnecessary scrutiny. "These seats are typically reserved for our premium customers." "We are premium customers," Aisha interjected, her attorney instincts kicking in. "We're executive platinum members, as indicated on our boarding passes." A white passenger behind them, a distinguished-looking man in his 50s, cleared his throat. "Excuse me, but I believe you're holding up the line questioning these passengers who clearly have first-class tickets." Heather's face flushed. "I was simply confirming their seating, Dr. Bradley Thompson," he supplied. "And I couldn't help but notice you didn't confirm my first-class ticket when I boarded moments ago." An uncomfortable silence followed before Heather gestured stiffly toward the cabin. "Enjoy your flight, Dr. Washington and family." Darnell nodded appreciatively to Bradley as they passed, a silent acknowledgement between strangers who understood what had just transpired. The Washington family settled into their spacious first-class seats, with Malik and Zara taking the window positions. Aisha helped Zara with her seatbelt while Darnell stored their carry-ons, keeping Malik's medical bag easily accessible in the compartment directly above their seats. "Dad, my chest feels tight," Malik whispered, the stress of the security screening and boarding confrontation triggering his asthma symptoms. "Take slow breaths," Darnell advised, retrieving Malik's inhaler from his pocket. "Use your inhaler if you need to." Malik took the medication discreetly, covering the action by pretending to yawn. From across the aisle, Dr. Thompson noticed but said nothing, simply offering an understanding smile. During the pre-flight service, Heather's treatment of the Washington family stood in stark contrast to her interactions with other first-class passengers. She avoided eye contact, addressed only minimal required questions to them, and seemed to hover suspiciously whenever passing their row. When serving pre-takeoff beverages, she nearly spilled orange juice on Aisha's white blazer, offering only a cursory, "sorry," without making eye contact. Meanwhile, she engaged in friendly conversation with Dr. Thompson about his destination and purpose in Boston. "Mommy, why is that lady being mean?" Zara asked, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Shoo, honey. She's just busy," Aisha replied diplomatically, though her expression conveyed a different message to Darnell. As Heather continued her duties, another flight attendant, a black man whose name tag read James Wilson, noticed the differential treatment. During a moment in the galley, James confronted her quietly. "Heather, is there a problem with the family in 2A? "No problem," she replied tersely, arranging drinks on her cart. "Just keeping an eye on them. The boy has some kind of device he keeps using." "It's an inhaler," James stated flatly. "For asthma. I noticed when they boarded." "Well, we need to be vigilant about unusual objects these days," Heather insisted. "You never know what could be disguised as something else." James fixed her with a hard stare. "Would you consider it unusual if the passenger using it wasn't black?" "This has nothing to do with race," Heather snapped, lowering her voice. "I'm following safety protocols. That family has been difficult since boarding, questioning my authority. I watched them board. They didn't question anything until you questioned their right to be in first class," James countered. "We're required to treat all passengers with respect, Heather. If I see differential treatment continuing, I'll need to report it to the captain." Heather's face hardened. 20 years I've been flying, James. Don't lecture me about passenger service. I know how to do my job." "Then do it professionally," James replied before returning to the cabin. As the plane taxied for takeoff, Darnell noticed James making a point to stop by their row. "Good afternoon, Dr. Washington. I see from your boarding information you're headed to Boston for the Hoffman Award. Congratulations, that's an incredible honor in the medical community." Darnell smiled, surprised and appreciative of the recognition. "Thank you. Are you familiar with the medical field?" "My sister's a neurologist at Johns Hopkins," James explained. "She mentioned your research last time we spoke. Is there anything I can get for your family before takeoff?" The genuine interaction didn't go unnoticed by Heather, who watched from the galley with narrowed eyes. Nor did it escape Dr. Thompson, who observed the contrasting behaviors of the two flight attendants with increasing interest. As the aircraft lifted into the sky, Malik took a deep breath from his inhaler, unaware that this routine medication would soon become the center of a controversy that would rock the airline industry and ignite a national conversation about race, medicine, and human dignity at 30,000 feet. 2 hours into the flight from Chicago to Boston, the cabin had settled into the quiet rhythm of travel. Most passengers were watching movies on their screens or dozing under thin airline blankets. In seat 2B, Malik Washington shifted uncomfortably, a familiar tightness building in his chest. "Dad," he whispered, tugging at Darnell's sleeve. "I need my inhaler again." Darnell immediately recognized the urgency in his son's voice. Malik's breathing had become shallow and rapid. Early warning signs of an asthma attack. He reached for the inhaler in Malik's pocket, but Malik shook his head. "I already used it 20 minutes ago. It's not helping enough." Alarm flashed across Darnell's face. As both a father and a doctor, he knew that requiring a second dose so soon indicated a potentially serious situation. "I'll get your backup from our bag." He stood quickly, opening the overhead compartment to retrieve Malik's medical bag. His methodical search grew increasingly frantic as he shifted items around. "It's not here," he muttered, double-checking every pocket. "Aisha, did you move Malik's backup inhaler?" Aisha looked up from helping Zara with her headphones, immediately alert. "No, it was in the side pocket of his medical bag." Malik's breathing grew more labored, a slight wheeze now audible with each exhale. Darnell pressed the call button with urgency. Heather appeared, her professional smile dropping when she saw who had summoned her. "Yes. My son needs his backup inhaler," Darnell explained quickly. It should be in our medical bag, but I can't find it. Has anyone moved our belongings? Heather's expression shifted subtly. Sir, no one has touched your bag since boarding. It's definitely missing, Darnell insisted, growing increasingly concerned as Malik's breathing deteriorated. It's a small blue inhaler with his prescription label on it. It's vital medication. Perhaps you forgot to pack it, Heather suggested with a dismissive shrug. Dr. Thompson, overhearing from across the aisle, leaned forward. Is everything all right? My son is having asthma symptoms and needs his medication, Darnell explained, keeping his voice measured despite his mounting anxiety. James approached from the back of the cabin, immediately assessing the situation. What can I do to help? The boy had some kind of inhaler device earlier, Heather interjected before Darnell could respond. He's already used it once during the flight. James turned to Darnell. Do you need the emergency medical kit? First, we need to find his backup inhaler, Darnell replied. It should be in our bags, but it's missing. A flicker of recognition crossed Heather's face, almost imperceptible, but not to Darnell's observant eye. You know something about my son's medication, he stated rather than asked. The surrounding passengers had grown quiet, attention drawn to the unfolding situation. Malik's wheezing had become more pronounced, and Aisha now had an arm around him, coaching him through controlled breathing techniques. Heather hesitated, glancing toward the galley. During beverage service, I noticed an unmarked device on your son's tray. Following security protocols, I removed it. Removed it? Aisha repeated incredulously. What exactly does that mean? Heather shifted uncomfortably under the increasing attention from nearby passengers. Items of suspicious nature must be disposed of for flight safety. You threw away my son's prescription medication. Darnell's voice rose slightly, disbelief giving way to anger. That suspicious device was a clearly labeled medical inhaler prescribed by his pulmonologist. Sir, please lower your voice, Heather warned. Becoming aggressive will not help, aggressive. Darnell stood, his imposing height causing Heather to step back. My son is having an asthma attack at 30,000 feet because you decided his life-saving medication looked suspicious. Would you have found it suspicious if he were white? The question hung in the air, heavy and unavoidable. Several passengers had begun recording the confrontation on their phones. James stepped forward. Heather, did you dispose of a passenger's medication without consulting them? I was following protocol for suspicious items, she insisted, though her confidence wavered. There is no protocol that allows disposing of clearly labeled prescription medication, James countered firmly. Especially without consulting the passenger or guardian. Darnell, maintaining remarkable composure given the circumstances, addressed Heather directly. My son could die because you decided his medication looked suspicious on a black child. The sentence reverberated through the cabin. Complete silence followed, broken only by Malik's labored breathing. A middle-aged woman across the aisle gasped audibly. She threw away a child's asthma medication. Murmurs spread through the cabin as the reality of the situation dawned on fellow passengers. Someone from business class had ventured forward, phone raised to capture the confrontation. I want the captain notified immediately, Darnell demanded, his professional authority evident in his tone. And I need the emergency medical kit now. James nodded and picked up the cabin phone while Heather stood frozen, suddenly aware of the numerous phones recording her. This is racial discrimination and medical endangerment, Aisha stated clearly, her legal training evident in her precise language. Everyone witnessing this, please maintain your recordings. We'll need them for the Federal Aviation Administration and Department of Transportation complaints. The videos were already spreading across social media platforms. Passengers with in-flight Wi-Fi had begun uploading clips with hashtags like #FlyingWhileBlack and #MedicationDiscrimination. Within minutes, the incident was gaining traction online. The captain's voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Due to a passenger disturbance, we will be making an emergency landing in Cleveland. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts. Heather turned pale. Sir, there's no need for an emergency landing. The situation is under control. Under control? Aisha challenged, her arms still around Malik, whose breathing was becoming increasingly labored. My son is having a medical emergency because of your discriminatory actions. Dr. Thompson stood up. Captain, this is not a passenger disturbance. This is a medical emergency caused by a flight attendant disposing of a child's necessary medication. I'm a physician witnessing this situation. As the plane began its descent toward Cleveland, Malik's condition continued to deteriorate. Darnell knelt beside his son, monitoring his pulse and respiratory rate with the precision of his medical training, powerless without the proper medication, watching his child struggle to breathe while surrounded by strangers recording what might become the worst moment of their lives. The Washington family had boarded as respected professionals heading to receive a prestigious award. Now they were descending in an emergency landing, their son's health in jeopardy, at the center of what was quickly becoming a viral story about the dangerous reality of racism at 30,000 feet. The cabin pressure seemed to intensify as Malik's breathing grew more strained. Darnell had entered full physician mode, his movements precise and clinical despite the parental terror in his eyes. Pulses elevated, respiratory rate increasing, he reported to James, who had returned with the aircraft's emergency medical kit. Oxygen saturation is definitely dropping based on his color. We need a pulse oximeter. James opened the kit, revealing its limited contents. This is everything we have on board. Darnell quickly assessed the supplies. No albuterol nebulizer treatment. Not surprising. He turned to his son, maintaining a calm demeanor. Malik, I need you to stay calm and take slow breaths. We're getting you help. Aisha held Malik's hand, her face a mask of composed concern despite the rage and fear swirling beneath. Zara had begun crying quietly, sensing the gravity of the situation without fully understanding it. Is there a doctor on board? James announced, although Dr. Thompson had already made his way over. I'm an allergist, Dr. Thompson stated, kneeling beside the Washington family. May I assist? Darnell nodded gratefully. My son has severe asthma. His rescue inhaler was confiscated and disposed of by your flight attendant. The accusation hung sharply in the air. Dr. Thompson's expression darkened momentarily before returning to professional focus. I have my emergency kit in my carry-on. It contains epinephrine and a bronchodilator that might help. Please, Darnell agreed, his medical knowledge confirming this could provide temporary relief. As Dr. Thompson retrieved his bag, passengers throughout first class and beyond were transfixed by the unfolding emergency. Phones continued recording, documenting not just a medical crisis but a human rights violation occurring in real time. Heather stood near the galley, her face pale as she whispered urgently with another flight attendant. The captain's voice came over the intercom again, Ladies and gentlemen, we've been cleared for priority landing at Cleveland Hopkins International Airport. Emergency medical services will meet us at the gate. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. Dr. Thompson returned with a small black bag. I have a bronchodilator that might help stabilize him until we land. Working together, Darnell and Dr. Thompson administered the medication, providing temporary relief to Malik's constricted airways. The boy's breathing eased slightly, though he remained in obvious distress. Thank you, Darnell said to Dr. Thompson, the two doctors exchanging a look of professional understanding layered with the unmistakable acknowledgement of what had really caused this emergency. Meanwhile, the Washington family's ordeal had already gone viral. Passengers with Wi-Fi access had uploaded videos that were spreading across social media platforms at lightning speed. #Justice for Malik was trending nationally, the shocking footage of a respected black doctor trying to save his son after a flight attendant disposed of vital medication striking a chord with millions. Aisha, ever strategic even in crisis, had been documenting everything on her phone. The airline's ground staff has been notified, James informed them quietly. They're aware of the situation. You mean they're aware their employee endangered a child's life through racial profiling? Aisha clarified, her voice controlled but cutting. James nodded slightly, professional restraint evident in his expression. Medical response teams are standing by for our arrival. From across the aisle, a passenger who had been silently watching spoke up. I've been flying this airline for 20 years, and I've never seen such disgraceful behavior from staff. She directed her comment at Heather, who pretended not to hear. Another passenger added, I've got the whole thing recorded, including when she admitted throwing away the medication. I've already sent it to 3 news stations. The collective outrage was palpable, passengers united in their shock and support for the Washington family. What would typically have been a cabin full of strangers separated by headphones and individual entertainment screens had transformed into a community of witnesses bound by their shared horror at what they were observing. Dr. Thompson checked Malik's pulse again. The medication is helping, but he needs proper treatment as soon as possible. His airways are still significantly compromised. Have you ever witnessed discrimination that puts someone's health or life at risk? Type number 1 in the comments if you believe Heather should be immediately terminated, or number 2 if you think she deserves a chance to explain her actions. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to stay updated on stories that matter. But what will happen when this plane lands? Will Malik receive the medical attention he desperately needs in time? And how will the airline respond to what's quickly becoming a PR nightmare? Let's continue. As the aircraft began its final descent into Cleveland, airline ground staff were frantically preparing for what had evolved from a medical emergency into a full-blown crisis. Corporate headquarters had been alerted as the hashtag airline so racist climbed Twitter's trending list, accompanied by video clips showing a black child in medical distress while a flight attendant who had confiscated his medication stood by. What the passengers on Flight 2857 didn't know was that Heather Davis had a history. 3 previous complaints from minority passengers had been filed against her in the past year alone, all quietly resolved with vouchers and non-disclosure agreements. The airline's computer system flagged her name as the crew member involved in this incident, sending additional alerts up the corporate chain. The descent felt interminable to the Washington family. Malik's condition had stabilized somewhat thanks to Dr. Thompson's medication, but he remained in significant distress, each breath a labor that no 12-year-old should have to endure. 2 minutes to landing, the captain announced as the ground rushed up to meet them. Darnell held his son's hand, feeling utterly helpless despite his years of medical training. In operating rooms, he routinely performed delicate procedures that saved lives, his skilled hands navigating the most complex neural pathways. Yet here, watching his son struggle to breathe because someone had decided his medication looked suspicious in his black hands, all his credentials, education, and social standing meant nothing. The harsh truth of American racial reality had never felt more brutally clear. The aircraft touched down with a forceful thud, the pilot prioritizing speed over passenger comfort. As soon as the seatbelt sign extinguished, James made an announcement, "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated to allow medical personnel to board the aircraft." Within minutes, emergency medical technicians rushed on board, guided quickly to Malik by James. The lead paramedic, a competent woman named Rivera, immediately assessed the situation. 12-year-old male, history of asthma, rescue medication confiscated during flight, Darnell reported clinically, his physician training overtaking parental panic. Symptoms began approximately 40 minutes ago, partial response to alternative bronchodilator administered by another passenger who is an allergist. Rivera nodded, fitting an oxygen mask over Malik's face and attaching a pulse oximeter to his finger. Oxygen saturation 89%. We need to get him to the hospital for nebulizer treatment and monitoring. Sir, I need you to take your seat, the second officer directed Darnell, hand instinctively moving toward his holster. He's a doctor helping his son who's having a medical emergency, Dr. Thompson interjected sharply. The problem is with your flight attendant who threw away this child's asthma medication. The officer hesitated, reassessing the scene before him. Heather stepped forward, her voice taking on a tremulous quality that hadn't been present during her earlier interactions. "These passengers became confrontational when I followed standard security procedures," she claimed. "I felt threatened." "That's absolutely false," came a chorus of voices from surrounding passengers. A woman in row 4 stood up, phone extended. "I have the entire interaction recorded." She admitted taking medication from a child's tray and throwing it away because she thought it looked suspicious. "Officers, I'm Dr. Bradley Thompson," the allergist introduced himself. "I witnessed everything. This family did nothing wrong. Their son is having a severe asthma attack because his rescue medication was confiscated by that flight attendant." More passengers joined in, offering their recordings as evidence. The police officers, now understanding the situation very differently than what they'd been told to expect, stepped back to assess. "We have multiple videos showing what happened," a business traveler added. "The only threat was to that child's life when his medication was thrown away." James approached the officers. "As the senior flight attendant currently on duty, I need to clarify that disposing of clearly labeled prescription medication is not airline policy under any circumstances. I witnessed Ms. Davis admit to removing and discarding the child's inhaler without consulting the parents." Heather's face flushed with anger. "This is completely unprofessional. Endangering a child's life is what's unprofessional," James replied firmly. The paramedics had stabilized Malik enough for transport. "We need to move him now," Rivera announced. "One parent can ride in the ambulance." "I'll go," Aisha decided, gathering her belongings. "Darnell, you stay with Zara and deal with this situation. I'll call you from the hospital." Darnell nodded, embracing his wife briefly before she followed the medical team carrying Malik off the aircraft. He then turned to the officers. "I need to file a formal complaint. What happened today was not just negligence, it was discrimination that endangered my son's life." "Sir, we'll need statements from everyone involved," the older officer acknowledged, his tone now respectful. "But first, let's move this conversation off the aircraft so the remaining passengers can continue their journey." As they exited the plane, the scene at the gate area was chaotic. News of the incident had spread rapidly. Local reporters had already gathered in the terminal, alerted by social media posts and videos that had gone viral within the hour. "Dr. Washington. Can you comment on what happened to your son?" shouted a reporter as soon as Darnell emerged from the jetway, 8-year-old Zara clutching his hand tightly. "My son was denied access to life-saving medication because of racial profiling," Darnell stated clearly, his composure remarkable given the circumstances. "Right now, my primary concern is his health. He's been transported to the hospital, where my wife has accompanied him." An airline representative in a crisp suit rushed forward. "Dr. Washington, I'm Jordan Phillips, Customer Relations Director. On behalf of the airline, I want to express our deepest apologies for this unfortunate misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding?" Dr. Thompson interrupted, having followed Darnell into the terminal. "Your employee confiscated and discarded prescribed medication from a child because of racial bias. That's not a misunderstanding, it's discrimination with potentially fatal consequences." The gathered crowd murmured in agreement, many passengers having deplaned specifically to show support for the Washington family. Phillips lowered his voice. "We'd like to offer the Washington family immediate compensation and first-class upgrades for a year to resolve this matter." "Resolve this matter?" Darnell repeated incredulously. "My son is being rushed to the hospital. This isn't about upgrades or compensation, it's about accountability." Meanwhile, at airline headquarters in Dallas, CEO Arnold Pierce was receiving real-time updates on the situation. The company's stock had already dropped 3% as #BoycottAirline trended worldwide. Pierce's primary concern, as expressed to his crisis management team, focused on financial implications rather than the welfare of the child involved. "How do we contain this?" Pierce demanded, watching video clips of the incident playing on multiple news channels simultaneously. Get our PR team to craft a statement about our commitment to inclusivity and safety. Make it clear that this is an isolated incident not reflective of our values. Back in Cleveland, Darnell was providing his statement to airport police, methodically recounting the events that had transpired at 30,000 feet. Throughout his account, he maintained the dignified composure that had served him through years of high-pressure surgeries and hospital politics. Only the slight tremor in his hands as he described his son's distress revealed the emotional toll beneath his professional exterior. Outside the hospital across town, reporters had already gathered, the story of a flight attendant discarding a black child's life-saving medication having captured national attention within hours. Inside, Malik Washington was receiving nebulizer treatments and supplemental oxygen, his condition slowly stabilizing under medical care that should never have been necessary. The incident that began with a simple pre-flight security screening had escalated into a national conversation about race, medical care, and the skies that supposedly belonged equally to all Americans. And it was only just beginning. The antiseptic smell of Cleveland Memorial Hospital's pediatric emergency department surrounded Aisha Washington as she sat beside Malik's bed, watching his oxygen levels on the monitor. After several nebulizer treatments, his breathing had stabilized, though doctors wanted to keep him overnight for observation. Mrs. Washington. Dr. Larissa Johnson entered the room, her white coat crisp over dark blue scrubs. I'm the attending physician for Malik tonight. His latest tests show significant improvement in lung function. Aisha nodded gratefully. Thank you for taking care of him. Dr. Johnson, a black woman in her early 40s with neat braids pulled back into a bun, checked Malik's vitals herself rather than delegating to a nurse. I understand what happened on the flight, she said quietly. Unfortunately, it's not as uncommon as people might think. You've seen similar cases? Aisha asked, her attorney's instinct for gathering information kicking in despite her exhaustion. Too many, Dr. Johnson confirmed, adjusting Malik's foreline. 3 months ago, we had a diabetic teenager brought in after a school security guard confiscated his insulin, claiming it might be drugs. Last year, a black woman with epilepsy was tackled by store security when she reached for her emergency medication during an aura, mistaking her for a shoplifter. Malik, drowsy but alert, had been listening. It's happened before too, Mom, he said softly. Aisha leaned closer. What do you mean, sweetie? At school. Remember when Coach Stevens took my inhaler during gym class? Said I was using it as an excuse to sit out. Malik's voice was stronger now, the medication having eased his breathing. And the time at the museum when the security guard made me throw away my water bottle even after I explained I needed it to take my pills. Aisha closed her eyes briefly, memories washing over her. The constant battle to protect her children went beyond the dramatic incidents that made headlines. It was the daily microaggressions, the constant suspicion, the perpetual need to justify their existence in spaces where others moved freely. Her phone buzzed with an incoming call from Darnell. He's stable, she reported immediately upon answering. They're keeping him overnight for observation. Thank God, Darnell's relief was palpable even through the phone. I'm finishing up with the police report here. The airline is in full damage control mode. How's our boy doing emotionally? Processing, Aisha replied, watching Malik who was now scrolling through social media on her tablet. He's seeing how much attention this is getting online. Dad, I'm trending. Malik called out, having heard his father's voice. Despite everything, Aisha smiled at the resilience of her son, able to find a moment of 12-year-old excitement amid trauma. I'll put you on speaker. Hey, champion, Darnell's voice filled the hospital room. You gave us quite a scare. I'm okay now, Malik assured him. Dr. Johnson is really nice. She said I was really brave. The bravest, Darnell agreed. Listen, buddy, a lot of people are talking about what happened to you. Reporters want to interview us. Are you comfortable with that? Malik considered this. Will it help stop it from happening to other kids? The simple question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Out of the mouths of babes, Aisha thought. It might, she answered honestly. But you don't have to do anything you don't want to. Your health and well-being come first. I want to talk about it, Malik decided. Ms. Rodriguez taught us about using our voices for change in social studies. Before they could discuss further, a nurse entered with news that a visitor had arrived. Trevor Bailey, the Washington family's longtime attorney and friend, strode in carrying a briefcase. I caught the first flight from Chicago when I saw the news, Trevor explained, embracing Aisha briefly before turning to Malik with a fist bump. How you holding up, young man? Better now, Malik replied. Did you see I'm trending, Uncle Trevor? Trevor smiled, though his eyes remained serious. I did. You're quite the celebrity. Your dad asked me to meet you here while he wraps things up at the airport. Once Malik was distracted by the television, Trevor lowered his voice. The airline's CEO has already called me twice. They're desperate to settle. Offering 7 figures and comprehensive policy changes. With an NDA, I assume. Aisha's tone made clear her thoughts on that prospect. Of course. They want this to disappear. Not happening, she replied firmly. This isn't about money. It's about accountability and systemic change. Meanwhile, across town, Darnell was completing his police statement when Dr. Thompson approached with his own documentation. I've written a detailed medical account of what I observed, Dr. Thompson explained, handing Darnell a sealed envelope. Including my professional opinion that your son's life was endangered by the flight attendant's actions. I've made copies for the police, the FAA, and the medical board. Thank you, Darnell said sincerely. You didn't have to get involved. Actually, I did, Dr. Thompson countered. Remaining neutral in situations of injustice is choosing the side of the oppressor. My father taught me that, and I've tried to live by it. As they spoke, James Wilson approached, having given his own statement to investigators. Dr. Washington, I want you to know that many of us at the airline are horrified by what happened today. It doesn't represent who we try to be. I appreciate that, James. Your intervention made a difference. James lowered his voice. You should know, Heather has done similar things before. There have been complaints, but they've been handled quietly. Not this time, Darnell assured him. Across the country, the incident had ignited a firestorm. Major news networks ran breaking coverage with headlines like, Black child denied life-saving medication on flight, and Doctor's son endangered by airline racial profiling. Social media platforms were flooded with similar stories from minority passengers, the hashtag #FlyingWhileBlack revealing hundreds of previously untold accounts of discrimination in the skies. At airline headquarters, CEO Arnold Pierce faced his executive team across a polished conference table, screens around the room displaying plummeting stock prices and social media metrics. The offer to the family has been rejected, the legal director reported. They're refusing to sign an NDA. Pierce slammed his hand on the table. Everyone has a price. Double it. Sir, the director of public relations interjected cautiously, this isn't just about money. The optics are devastating. We need to acknowledge the racial component directly. Absolutely not, Pierce snapped. The moment we acknowledge that this was racially motivated, we open ourselves to class action lawsuits from every minority passenger who's ever had a less than perfect experience. But sir, the videos show an employee following security protocols too zealously, Pierce interrupted. We apologize for the misunderstanding and reaffirm our commitment to passenger safety. That's our statement. Back at the hospital, Darnell had finally arrived, embracing Malik tightly before greeting Trevor and Dr. Johnson. The family reunited, they gathered around Malik's bed to discuss next steps. The airline wants this to go away quietly, Trevor explained. They're offering significant compensation. What do you think we should do, Dad? Malik asked. Darnell considered his son's question carefully. What happened to you today happens to black people across this country every day, just usually without cameras recording it. We have an opportunity to create real change, but it will mean putting ourselves in the spotlight. Like Rosa Parks? Malik asked, referencing his recent history lessons. Similar in some ways, Aisha acknowledged. It would mean sharing our story publicly, maybe testifying before regulatory agencies or Congress. I think we should do it, Malik decided, his young face serious. For all the kids who don't have doctors as parents or people recording videos for them. Darnell and Aisha exchanged a look of pride tinged with the unique sorrow known only to black parents. Pride in raising a child with such moral clarity, sorrow that he had to develop such awareness so young. As the Washington family discussed their path forward, Heather Davis was giving a disastrous interview to a local news station, claiming she felt threatened by Darnell's aggressive demeanor and denying any racial motivation in her actions. Social media was already dissecting her every word, juxtaposing clips of her interview with passenger videos showing a very different reality. The incident that began at 30,000 feet had landed squarely in America's ongoing conversation about race, privilege, and the spaces, both literal and figurative, where black Americans still fought for equal treatment. What had started as a family trip to celebrate achievement had transformed into something much larger, a potential watershed moment in how America confronted discrimination in its skies. 48 hours after the incident, the airline's corporate headquarters resembled a war room. CEO Arnold Pierce stood at the head of the conference table, tie loosened, his normally immaculate appearance showing signs of strain. Television screens mounted on the walls displayed continuous news coverage, all featuring the same damning footage from Flight 2857. Our stock has dropped 12% since market open, reported the CFO, sliding graphs across the table. Major corporate accounts are suspending their contracts pending review, and we've had over 200,000 reservation cancellations in the last 24 hours. Pierce loosened his tie further. What about the Washington family? Have they accepted our revised offer? The legal director shook her head. They've retained Goldstein and Rivera, one of the top civil rights firms in the country. They're not interested in a settlement with an NDA. They're demanding policy changes, anti-bias training, and full accountability for all involved. Unacceptable, Pierce snapped. Find leverage. Everyone has a price or a pressure point. A younger executive spoke up hesitantly. Sir, maybe we should consider their demands. The public perception is fickle, Pierce interrupted. Next week they'll be outraged about something else. Our responsibility is to shareholders, not Twitter mobs. The PR director cleared his throat. Actually, this isn't following the normal outrage cycle. The Washington family has significant credibility, he's a renowned neurosurgeon, she's a respected attorney, and their son is an honor student with a documented medical condition. The videos are unambiguous. Major civil rights organizations have taken up their cause. This isn't going away. Then we need a scapegoat, Pierce decided. Heather Davis is the obvious choice. Draft a statement announcing her termination and our zero tolerance for discrimination. She's already threatening to sue for wrongful termination, the legal director warned. Claims she was following security protocols and is being sacrificed to political correctness. Her interview made things significantly worse, added the PR director, queuing up a clip on the main screen. Heather's face appeared, defensive and indignant, I was just doing my job. If parents want their children to have special treatment, they need to communicate properly. I can't be expected to distinguish between suspicious items and medical devices. I'm not a mind reader. The interviewer's voice, the medication was clearly labeled with a prescription, according to multiple witnesses. Labels can be falsified, Heather countered. And his father became very aggressive when questioned. I felt threatened. The interviewer, video shows Dr. Washington remaining seated and speaking calmly until his son began having breathing difficulties. "That's not how I perceived it in the moment," Heather insisted. "And I want to be very clear, this had absolutely nothing to do with race." The clip ended, and the boardroom remained silent for a moment. "She's a liability," Pierce concluded. "Draft the termination statement. Make it clear her actions don't reflect our company values." Across town, in a hotel suite that had become a temporary command center, the Washington family was preparing for their first press conference. Malik, now recovered and released from the hospital, sat reviewing talking points with his mother. "Remember, you don't have to answer any question that makes you uncomfortable," Aisha reminded him. "And if you get tired or overwhelmed, just squeeze my hand and we'll take a break." Malik nodded, surprisingly composed for a 12-year-old about to face national media. "I understand, Mom." Darnell entered from the adjoining room, ending a phone call. That was Dr. Thompson. "He's being pressured by the airline to clarify his statement. They're implying his medical privileges at airports could be affected if he continues supporting us." "Can they do that?" Malik asked. "They can try," Aisha replied, making a note. "But intimidating a witness is problematic legally and would only strengthen our case." Trevor Bailey arrived with a team of paralegals carrying document boxes. "We've received responses to our FOIA requests faster than expected. Turns out several government agencies were already investigating this airline for discrimination complaints." "How many complaints?" Darnell asked. "Hundreds over the past 5 years, with a significant spike under the current CEO's leadership," Trevor replied, laying out folders on the suite's dining table. "Most were resolved with small settlements and NDAs. They've been burying this problem with money." "Not anymore," Aisha stated firmly, scrolling through her phone. "The airline just announced Heather's termination. They're calling it an isolated incident and reaffirming their commitment to diversity." "Isolated incident?" Trevor scoffed. "We have documentation of 27 similar cases involving this same flight attendant alone." Meanwhile, in his small apartment, James Wilson was reviewing an email from airline management. The message was clear though carefully worded: his continued employment would be reassessed if he provided testimony that damages the company's reputation. In other words, tell the truth and lose your job. James thought about his sister's medical school loans that he helped pay, his mother's care home expenses, and his own mortgage. Then he thought about Malik Washington struggling to breathe while a colleague prioritized prejudice over a child's life. With a deep breath, he replied to the email, "I will be providing full and honest testimony as requested by investigators. My integrity is not for sale." Within minutes, his airline email access was revoked. Back at airline headquarters, a junior analyst rushed into the boardroom where discussions continued. "Sir, we have a situation," she announced breathlessly. "An investigative reporter has obtained internal emails discussing previous discrimination complaints against Heather Davis. They also have social media posts from her private accounts with problematic content." "What kind of problematic?" Pierce demanded. The analyst hesitated. "Racial slurs, sir. Anti-black memes. Comments about being vigilant with certain passengers. They're preparing to publish within the hour." The boardroom erupted into chaos as executives shouted over each other. Pierce slammed his hand on the table repeatedly for silence. "Contain this. Buy us time. Tell them we need to verify the authenticity of these alleged emails and posts. Offer them an exclusive interview instead." The PR director shook his head. "It's too late for that strategy. The posts are already being shared online. #AirlineIsRacist is trending #1 worldwide." As the crisis deepened at corporate headquarters, Malik Washington was preparing to face the cameras. He adjusted his tie, the same one he had planned to wear to his father's award ceremony, and looked at his reflection in the hotel mirror. "Do you think this will make a difference, Dad?" he asked as Darnell helped straighten his collar. I believe it will, Darnell replied. Not just because of what happened, but because of who you are. You're not just a victim, Malik. You're a brilliant young man with dreams and potential. You put a face to an issue many people find easy to ignore. And whatever happens, Aisha added, joining them at the mirror, we're standing up for what's right. That always matters, even when change comes slowly. The family embraced, three figures reflected in the mirror. Parents who had achieved the American dream through excellence and determination, and a child who had just learned its limitations in the most terrifying way. In Washington, D.C., congressional staffers were already drafting letters demanding hearings on discrimination in air travel. The Department of Transportation had launched a formal investigation. Class action lawyers were assembling cases representing hundreds of minority passengers with similar experiences. What had begun as one family's travel nightmare had escalated into a national reckoning about race, power, and accountability in America's skies, all because a flight attendant had decided a black child's medication looked suspicious. And at the center of the storm stood 12-year-old Malik Washington, no longer just a gifted science student with asthma, but an unwitting symbol in America's ongoing struggle toward its professed ideals of equality and justice for all. The wood-paneled committee room buzzed with anticipation. C-SPAN cameras panned across the crowded gallery as the Senate Transportation Committee prepared to begin its emergency hearing on discrimination and safety in air travel. 1 week after Flight 2857, what had begun as a single incident had catalyzed a national conversation about race, medical access, and accountability in America's skies. Senator Gloria Martinez, the committee chairwoman, called the session to order with a sharp rap of her gavel. Today we address disturbing allegations of systematic discrimination in our nation's airlines, practices that not only violate civil rights but potentially endanger lives. At the witness table, Darnell Washington sat composed in a charcoal suit, his testimony notes arranged precisely before him. Beside him sat James Wilson, still wearing his airline uniform despite having been placed on administrative leave after agreeing to testify. Dr. Bradley Thompson occupied the third chair, with airline executives including a visibly uncomfortable CEO Arnold Pierce seated at a separate table. Noticeably absent was Heather Davis, who had declined to appear, citing medical stress. Dr. Washington, Senator Martinez began, please share with this committee what happened to your family on July 17. Darnell leaned toward the microphone, his deep voice steady. My 12-year-old son nearly died because a flight attendant decided his clearly labeled prescription medication looked suspicious when in the hands of a black child. For the next 15 minutes, he methodically recounted the events, his medical training evident in the precision of his testimony. He neither embellished nor diminished what had occurred, allowing the facts to speak for themselves. What makes this incident particularly significant, he concluded, is not that it happened, but that it was recorded. What my family experienced happens to Black Americans daily, just usually without cameras validating our reality. Senator William Blackburn, a conservative known for skepticism about racism claims, leaned forward. Dr. Washington, isn't it possible this was simply a misunderstanding about airline safety protocols rather than racial discrimination? Senator, I considered that possibility, Darnell replied evenly. Then I learned that on the same flight, 3 white children had medication, including a nebulizer similar to my son's. None were questioned or had their medication confiscated. The gallery murmured as this new information registered. James Wilson's testimony followed, his hands trembling slightly as he described a culture of unchecked discrimination within the airline. Flight attendants have complete discretion over what constitutes suspicious behavior or items, he explained. Those determinations are almost never reviewed unless a passenger files a formal complaint, which most don't know how to do or lack time to pursue. And in your experience, Senator Martinez inquired, is this discretion applied equally across all passenger demographics? No, Senator, James replied firmly. In my 8 years with the airline, I've witnessed a clear pattern of heightened scrutiny toward passengers of color, particularly Black and Middle Eastern travelers. That's an outrageous allegation, Pierce interjected, breaking protocol. "The witness has the floor," Senator Martinez reprimanded, before turning back to James. "Mr. Wilson, were you aware of previous complaints against Ms. Davis specifically?" "Yes, Senator. 3 formal complaints in the past year alone, all from minority passengers, all resolved with settlements and non-disclosure agreements." Dr. Thompson testified next, providing medical context about the severity of Malik's asthma attack and the critical importance of immediate access to medication. "In my professional opinion as a board-certified allergist," he stated, "confiscating this child's inhaler created a life-threatening situation that was entirely preventable and had no legitimate safety justification." As questioning continued, a congressional aide hurried to Senator Martinez, passing her a note. After reading it, she addressed the committee. "I've just been informed that the Washington Post is publishing an investigative report showing that the airline in question has settled over 200 discrimination complaints in the past 5 years, all with strict non-disclosure provisions. Additionally, they've obtained internal emails instructing customer service representatives to offer higher settlements to minority passengers who use the word discrimination in their complaints." All eyes turned to CEO Pierce, whose complexion had paled considerably. "Mr. Pierce," Senator Martinez continued, "would you care to respond to these allegations?" Pierce tugged at his collar. "Without seeing these alleged emails, I cannot comment on their authenticity or context. What I can say is that our airline has a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination of any kind." "Yet you employed a flight attendant with multiple discrimination complaints," Senator Blackburn noted, his earlier skepticism now directed at the airline. "And settled hundreds of similar complaints while apparently taking no corrective action." As Pierce struggled to respond, his phone buzzed with an urgent message. The airline's stock had plummeted another 15% as the Washington Post story went live, featuring screenshots of damning internal communications and an interactive map showing discrimination complaints across the airline's routes. Meanwhile, in a hospital conference room miles away, Dr. Larissa Johnson presented her research to the American Medical Association's Emergency Summit on Racial Disparities in Medical Access During Travel. "What happened to Malik Washington is not an isolated incident," she explained, showing data from her 10-year study. Black and brown travelers report being questioned about medical devices and medications at rates 5 times higher than white travelers, with confiscation occurring 8 times more frequently. Her presentation included testimonials from patients with diabetes questioned about insulin pumps, epilepsy patients whose emergency medications were confiscated, and black children with asthma repeatedly subjected to suspicion when using inhalers in public spaces. "The consequences of these disparities are not merely inconvenient, they're potentially fatal," Dr. Johnson emphasized. "And they represent a public health crisis that demands immediate action." Back at the congressional hearing, Pierce found himself increasingly cornered as evidence mounted. The committee had obtained records showing the airline's diversity training consisted of a 20-minute video that hadn't been updated in 7 years, despite repeated recommendations from their own Human Resources Department. "Mr. Pierce," Senator Martinez pressed, "emails show your legal team specifically advised increasing settlement amounts rather than addressing the root causes of discrimination complaints. What was the reasoning behind that strategy?" Before Pierce could formulate an answer, breaking news flashed across phones throughout the room. An investigative journalist had uncovered social media posts from Heather Davis spanning several years. Posts containing racist memes, complaints about certain passengers who don't belong in first class, and even specific references to being suspicious of devices carried by minority travelers. The posts directly contradicted the airline's claim that Davis had no history of racial bias and had been following standard security protocols in good faith. As the hearing adjourned for a brief recess, Trevor Bailey approached Darnell in the hallway. "The airline's lawyers just called. They want to meet immediately. No NDAs, no confidentiality clauses. They're ready to discuss systemic changes." Darnell nodded, his expression serious. It shouldn't have taken congressional hearings and stock crashes to get basic human dignity. But if they're finally ready for real change, we'll listen. What changed their minds? James asked, joining them. Reality became undeniable, Trevor replied. Between the videos, the emails, Davis's social media, your testimony, and now the Washington Post investigation, they've lost control of the narrative. As they spoke, Aisha called with news from home. Malik's school held an assembly about standing up against discrimination. They're asking if he would be willing to speak when he returns. How's he feeling about all this? Darnell asked. Surprisingly positive, Aisha replied. He said something interesting this morning. That before all this happened, he used to try hiding his inhaler because he was embarrassed about having asthma. Now he sees it differently. How so? He said, if people tried to take away my right to breathe, then breathing itself becomes an act of resistance. Darnell smiled, pride temporarily overshadowing the exhaustion of the past week. Out of the mouths of babes. As the recess ended and they returned to the hearing room, news alerts reported that Pierce had been summoned to an emergency board meeting. The airline's largest shareholders were demanding leadership changes in light of the day's revelations. The turning point had arrived. What began as one child's medical emergency had exposed patterns of discrimination too blatant to deny and too consequential to ignore. The systems designed to shield corporations from accountability through private settlements and NDAs had collided with the democratizing power of cell phone videos and social media. For the Washington family, the path forward remained challenging. But enforcing a national confrontation with issues long swept under first-class cabin carpets, they had already created change that would benefit countless travelers who would never know their names. 6 months later, the grand ballroom of the Chicago Convention Center hummed with the energy of 300 young people gathered for the inaugural Youth Leadership Summit on Equality and Justice. At the podium stood Malik Washington, now 13 and noticeably taller than when America first met him during that harrowing flight. Before last July, I was just a kid who loved science and hated having asthma, Malik began, his voice steady as he addressed the rapt audience. Today, I still love science and still have asthma, but I understand something I didn't before, that breathing freely isn't just a medical right, it's a human right that some people have to fight harder for than others. In the front row, Darnell and Aisha watched their son with undisguised pride. Beside them sat Zara, now 9 and sporting a t-shirt emblazoned with "Little Sisters for Big Change." Dar. Bradley Thompson and his wife occupied seats nearby, their friendship with the Washingtons having deepened in the months since the incident. The hardest lesson I learned, Malik continued, was that excellence doesn't protect you from prejudice. My dad is a brain surgeon. My mom is a powerful lawyer. We were flying first class to an award ceremony. None of that mattered when someone decided my medication looked suspicious because of who was holding it. The settlement with the airline had been unprecedented, not for its monetary value, though that was substantial, but for the structural changes it mandated. The Washington family had refused to accept any agreement that didn't address systemic issues, rejecting multiple offers before reaching terms that satisfied their deeper purpose. The most significant outcome wasn't financial at all, but the creation of Safe Skies for All, a nonprofit organization headed by Darnell and Aisha, dedicated to transportation equality and medical access for travelers. The settlement funded its operations for 10 years, with a particular focus on training, policy development, and legal advocacy. Real change happens at the system level, Malik told the assembled youth, sounding remarkably like his mother. Individual hearts and minds matter, but policies and accountability matter more. In the months following the congressional hearings, the transformation within the airline industry had been swift and far-reaching. The Department of Transportation had implemented new regulations requiring comprehensive anti-bias training for all customer-facing airline personnel, clear medical accommodation policies, and transparent reporting of discrimination complaints. James Wilson, far from losing his career for speaking truth, had been promoted to head the airline's newly established Office of Inclusion and Passenger Advocacy under the company's new leadership. Following Pierce's resignation and the board's overhaul, James had helped design training programs now being adopted industry-wide. Mr. Wilson taught me something important, Malik said, acknowledging James who sat on the stage behind him. He showed me that being an ally sometimes means risking something valuable to stand up for what's right. He didn't know my family, but he stood up for us anyway. Across town, in a sterile hotel conference room, Heather Davis sat through day 3 of a court-mandated sensitivity training program. Despite losing her aviation career and becoming something of a social media pariah, she remained resentful, convinced she had been sacrificed to political correctness. The training was part of her settlement with the Washingtons. They had declined to press criminal charges in exchange for her completion of the program and community service hours. The instructor, a specialist in implicit bias, addressed the small group. The most dangerous prejudices are the ones we don't recognize in ourselves. They influence our split-second decisions in ways we don't realize until harmful consequences occur. Heather doodled on her notepad, internally rejecting the message while externally going through required motions. Some transformations would take longer than others, if they happened at all. Meanwhile, Malik had been channeling his experience into innovation. Working with mentors from his school's science program, he had developed a prototype for a medical alert system designed specifically for young travelers with chronic conditions. My MedAlert bracelet connects to an app that stores all your prescription information and doctor's notes, he explained, displaying his invention to the youth summit. If there's ever a question about your medication, the flight attendant or security officer can scan the QR code and verify everything instantly. No more suspicious devices, just clear medical information. Several airlines had already expressed interest in helping develop and implement the system, recognizing both its practical value and the positive publicity associated with the young inventor. Bradley Thompson had become an unexpected but steadfast ally in the Washington's advocacy work. His testimony at the congressional hearings had carried particular weight coming from a white physician with no personal connection to the family. Dr. Thompson taught me about being an upstander instead of a bystander, Malik acknowledged. Sometimes all it takes is one person saying, "This isn't right," to change everything. Bradley nodded in appreciation, remembering his father's words about neutrality in the face of injustice. Among them were several families who had reached out after experiencing similar incidents, now finding community and purpose in collective advocacy. Later that evening, the Washingtons boarded another flight, this time to Washington, D.C., where Darnell would testify before Congress again, supporting the Medical Access in Transportation Act inspired by Malik's experience. The difference in their treatment was immediately apparent. The diverse flight crew greeted them with genuine warmth, the captain even stepping out to personally welcome Dr. Washington and his family. Malik's medical bag was given an approved tag at check-in, eliminating any potential questions about its contents. These changes weren't special treatment for a now recognizable family, but standard procedures implemented across all major airlines following the regulatory overhaul. As they settled into their seats, Malik noticed a young boy across the aisle using an inhaler identical to his own. Without hesitation, he smiled and offered a thumbs up of solidarity. The boy's mother, recognizing Malik, leaned over. "Thank you," she said simply. "My son doesn't have to hide his medication anymore." Darnell, observing the interaction, reflected on the journey of the past 6 months. What had begun as a terrifying medical emergency had transformed into a movement, changing policies, practices, and perhaps even some perspectives. The cost had been high: media scrutiny, death threats from those who denied the racial component, endless meetings and testimonies. But watching his son confidently help another child with asthma, Darnell knew it had been worth it. In standing up with that one powerful sentence, "My son could die because you decided his medication looked suspicious on a black child," he had spoken a truth that could no longer be denied or ignored. As the plane took off, rising above Chicago toward the Capitol, Malik looked out the window at the city lights below, breathing easily and freely, both literally and figuratively, for perhaps the first time in his young life. Malik's story teaches us that discrimination can happen anywhere, even at 30,000 feet. It shows how racial bias affects even the most accomplished black families, threatening not just dignity but life itself. The Washington family's experience reveals the power of standing firm against injustice rather than accepting quiet settlements that maintain broken systems. We see the crucial role of allies like Dr. Thompson and James, who risked personal comfort to stand for what's right. Their actions remind us that witnessing discrimination creates a moral obligation to speak up. The story demonstrates how modern technology, cell phones and social media, can transform individual injustices into catalysts for systemic change when the evidence becomes undeniable. Perhaps most importantly, we learn that real change requires attacking problems at their roots. The Washingtons could have accepted money and moved on. Instead, they demanded policy changes, training programs, and accountability structures that would protect others. Their choice transformed a traumatic experience into a movement that made travel safer for everyone. In the end, we see that true justice isn't about punishment but transformation, creating systems where breathing freely becomes a right that requires no extraordinary courage to claim. What would you do if you witnessed discrimination like what happened to Malik? Would you speak up like Dr. Thompson and James did, or would you stay silent? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more powerful racism stories that matter. Remember, change happens one voice at a time, and sometimes that voice needs to be yours. Thank you for watching, and may we all have the courage to stand up for what's right, even when doing so feels frightening.